As-Salamu alaykum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Welcome dear viewers from around the world joining us on our live program Gems of the Heart, and I'm your host for the evening, Junaid Dar. Dear brothers and sisters, I'd like to begin by thanking Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala for once again uniting us and bringing us together to talk about His beautiful names and His attributes. I'd also like to begin by making mention of the blessed name of the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam. Dear viewers, as you are aware, our series is ongoing and the topic is matters pertaining to the heart. And we've gone through different aspects relating to Aqidah, to matters of belief, and now we are in the subject of the Asma wa Sifat, the names and attributes of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Now why are we looking at the names? Why are we looking at the attributes? Because this topic is directly connected to our hearts. It is a topic that if we understand it correctly, it will shake our hearts. It will bring us closer to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and not just that, but it will give us the understanding that Allah wants us to have in order to understand Allah, in order for us to understand what it is that is wanted from us in this world. My dear brothers and my dear sisters, today's name is a very important name, and I really want you to focus on our name today, and that is As-Salaam, which is loosely translated as peace. Now if you look around the world today, what do you find? You find bloodshed, you find killing, you find disturbance, you find theft, you find all sorts of crime and vice taking place all across the world. And not just that, but you find accusations against Islam, that Islam is a violent religion or a religion that was spread by the sword. All these negative attributes are put against Islam. But when we look at the name of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, when we open the book of Allah, the Quran, and we look at the Sunnah of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, we find the word Salam, we find the word peace. When two Muslims greet one another, they greet another with what? As-Salamu alaykum, may peace be with you. So we are constantly engaged in peaceful acts. We are trying to please the one who is called As-Salam, peace. So let's begin our discussion, where we can talk about this topic and what is meant by Allah's name peace, and how we can attain peace, not just in this world, but inshallah ta'ala how we can get to the land of peace, which is paradise as well. My dear brothers and sisters, the phone line is open. Don't forget to answer a question from the last week, where we asked you to tell us the difference between two of Allah's names that sound very similar. That is Al-Ghafur and Ghaffar. What are their differences? We've got some of your answers on Facebook. We will come to those towards the end of the program. So do pick up your phones, do join us inshallah. We'd like to hear your contributions, like to hear your thoughts. Even if you'd like to add something to the program, feel free to do so. So let us begin by introducing the Sheikh, and then we can go straight into our questions. If I can begin by introducing Sheikh Ibrahim Zidan, I'd like to welcome you to our program, Gems of the Heart. Sheikh, As-Salamu alaykum.
Wa alaykum as-salam wa rahmatullahi.
Sheikh, we have moved swiftly now. We're looking into the fifth or sixth name of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and the name is As-Salam. And it's one of our favorite subjects. Talk about peace and to break barriers or to break these misconceptions across the world. How important is it to talk about this name today?
Alhamdulillah wa salatu wa salam ala rasulullah wa ba'd. One of the names of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is As-Salam. And we get to know that this is one of the names of Allah because it's mentioned in the Quran clearly. And the meaning of it, the word As-Salam, comes from the root word of Salama, which means is free from all weaknesses and deficiencies. And that is the outcome, or that what leads to basically what the word peace means or entitles, or when people have, or they want to feel the feel of peace, which is being free from all disturbances and to be tranquil and to be calm and so on and so forth. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is the one that is perfect in all aspects, and He has the perfect names and attributes. So when we say that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is As-Salam, that means He has no deficiencies and weaknesses whatsoever. He's free from all of this.
Okay. And
one of which of any disturbances or any evil, even, and therefore His religion is free from any disturbances or any evil or anything whatsoever. There is corruption or whatever there is, because if He is As-Salam, that means His religion is the religion of As-Salam, and His actions and His words and the book of Allah and the way of the Prophet ﷺ, and the Prophet ﷺ being the best of all human beings with this meaning, the one that had the most and the perfect peace within His own self, the one that is free from all weaknesses of all human beings that would prevent them from living really the life of peace and goodness and so on. And the more the person is a follower of the Prophet ﷺ, the more he would have a share in this.
Okay, excellent. So the English translation of saying As-Salam is peace is not strong enough, I think. If one is free from all perfection, is greater than peace.
Right, definitely. And that's what even makes the peace something that is never changed.
Okay.
A person might be disturbed, away from any disturbances, but temporarily.
Okay.
But Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala being As-Salaam, the one that is free from all weaknesses and deficiencies, and that's why He is the one that His rulings and everything is to bring peace and tranquility and comfort to all humanity.
Okay, excellent. Sheikh, also the word Salam, it sounds very similar to Muslim or even the religion Islam. And what is the connection between all of these words?
They all have the same root, as we see it even with the sound of it.
Right.
And that's why the word salam, and that's what we say in greetings, it means that you're saying basically, when you say assalamu alaikum, you're making dua, supplication to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, that Muslim that you're saying salam to, he's free from all harm.
Okay.
And from all weakness and all evil in this life and hereafter. Such a perfect dua by just greeting that Muslim. And that's where even the root of the name of Al-Islam. Al-Islam means submission to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala.
Right.
But it shares the same ruling or roots, or has the same ruling roots of the word salam.
Okay.
Which basically this is what happens when a person submits himself to the one that is free from all deficiencies, to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. This submission, without it, people will be always disturbed on the face of earth. They will be always in deviation and struggle with one another in an evil way and so on, unless they submit themselves to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, because He is As-Salaam subhanahu wa ta'ala, the only one that people deserve from them to submit to Himself fully and perfectly.
Okay, excellent. So the concept of submission to Allah, what you're saying, it leads us to the total peace that we're looking for in our lives.
Right, because when we see what causes people not to have peace,
okay,
what is the reason for this? It's within. It's not something outside or physical actions. It's something that within the heart.
Right.
That's when the person doesn't feel peace within his own self, and therefore it shows in one's actions and so on. And why there's no peace within one's heart? Because this heart is owned by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. He's the one that is the creator of this heart. And He created this heart to be in that state of submission to its creator. So when the heart is not submitting to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, the heart becomes attached to all kinds of weaknesses and human beings and entities and all of these things. Then you're basically disturbing that heart.
Okay.
This heart needs to be all together on one thing. But you find it east and the west and all kinds of things, and wealth and concerns and stresses and children and families and so on. You find the heart is being torn in all of these different places.
Sure.
But when it submits itself to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, worship none but Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, then this is the real peace comes in place. And then the physical actions becomes all over the place, but the heart is settled on one focus and one thing only, and that is submission to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala.
Okay, excellent. Dear viewers, I'd gently like to remind you again of our phone number, which is there across your screens. Please do pick up the phones and give us your answers to the question, or if you would like to add something to the program, feel free to do that as well. We'd love to hear your comments, your questions, whatever you'd like to bring to the table, feel free to do that in the program. Sheikh, it's also very interesting to note that the word salam, it's only mentioned once inside of the Holy Quran, and that's in Surah Al-Hashr. Now, why is it mentioned just the once?
As far as the name of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is concerned, it's mentioned more than one time.
Sure.
But when it comes to the name of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, it's mentioned at the end of Surah Al-Hashr. It mentioned some of the names of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So this is to inform the believers and the reciters of the Quran that one of the names of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is As-Salaam. And more than one word, more than one name of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala that has the same concept, that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is free from all deficiencies. And the Surah Al-Hashr itself, when it starts with the glorification of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and it ends with the glorification of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, which sabbaha lillah, that means Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is free from all deficiencies. That's the meaning of subhanallah or sabbaha lillah, that everything declares clearly that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is away from any deficiency. So that's why you would find the entire Quran talks about As-Salaam as far as the name of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, but in the attribute concept of it.
Okay.
That Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has no imperfections whatsoever. He's the most perfect. So that's why the name, just to mention that this is the name of Allah.
Sure.
But the meaning of it is all over the Quran.
Sure.
When basically you can say clearly, half of the Quran is talking about the imperfection that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is away from.
Right.
And then Alhamdulillah, or the meanings of Alhamd, that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is the most perfect.
All right, excellent. And the verse itself in Surah Al-Hashr, where Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, he says, Huwa al-Malik al-Quddus as-Salam. So what are the other two adjectives mentioned here as well of Quddus and al-Malik? Why do we find this connection?
The connection is one of the things that the ulama, they looked into with the names of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. One can lead to the other, one can mean the other in different meanings, or by necessity, by relationships. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is al-Malik. Al-Malik meaning the one that has the sovereignty, the king of all kings.
Right.
And there is something called al-Malik, and there is al-Milk, or owner, or al-Malik. Right? Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is the owner, and He has the sovereignty. Because again, human beings in this life, you can own your house, but you don't have full sovereignty over it, because the government will, make you pay taxes, and you can't do things on your house the way you like it, and so on. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is the owner, and He has the sovereignty over everything that He created. Al-Quddus is the one, it's very close meaning to As-Salaam, which basically means that He is glorified, that He's pure from any deficiency.
Okay.
As-Salaam is of a more lenient and a soft word that means that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is the one that has no deficiency. It kind of sounds the same, but As-Salam is more of tanzih and munazzah an kulli naqs, al-Quddus al-Mutahhar, the one that is purified, the one that is free.
Okay.
Purified from all deficiency, the one that is free from all deficiencies. Okay. So it's the perfect names of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala.
So it's almost like they coincide with one another, and they emphasize one another at the same time.
Right, okay. Definitely. And that's with being part of the names of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, with His actions and His being subhanahu wa ta'ala. And therefore also His actions subhanahu wa ta'ala, and His religion and His revelation, and so on and so forth.
Okay, excellent. Sheikh, that's the one verse that talks about As-Salam as in the attribute. Then we have a number of hadith which talk about as well. A very short one, فَإِنَّ اللَّهَ هُوَ السَّلَامُ. So in this hadith, what is being discussed here?
Right. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is As-Salam, and the hadith when people would say As-Salamu alaykum, and the Prophet ﷺ, one time someone was saying, instead of saying As-Salamu alaykum, he would say Alayka As-Salam. Right. Which means on you is As-Salam. So the Prophet ﷺ corrected them. Don't say that. When you greet someone, say As-Salamu alaykum.
Right.
Because Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is As-Salam. He is As-Salam subhanahu wa ta'ala. So when you say As-Salamu alaykum, you are basically making dua to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala that peace will be on you.
Okay.
And not saying the name of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, because He is As-Salam subhanahu wa ta'ala.
Okay, excellent. Sheikh, also there's another narration inside Sahih Muslim which makes mention that whenever the Prophet ﷺ would pray, he wouldn't leave his prayer until he would say the following dua, Allahumma anta salam wa minka salam tabarakta ya dhal jalali wal ikram. What is the beauty of mentioning this after the prayer?
Right. After making the salah and after saying salam on both sides, when a person makes salam, finish the salah, and this is the end of the salah, one of the things that the Prophet ﷺ would say first, right after the salah, Allahumma anta salam wa minka salam. Praising Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in the most perfect way, after or before making istighfar, that asking Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala for forgiveness, because we cannot really fulfill the rights of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and we're always deficient even in our ibadah. That when we make our salah, we cannot really do it in the most perfect way, that the way that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala ought to be worshipped, because we are weak and we are human beings. So stating this, and then stating right after that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is the one that free from all deficiencies. We're deficient. Okay. But Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, He is As-Salam, the one that is free from all weaknesses and deficiency. وَمِنْكَ السَّلَامُ. And from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, we receive the goodness and the perfection, which was with our weakness is in itself the perfection. When a person would admit that he is deficient and he is weak, this is in itself a perfection to a human being, that he humble himself to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Otherwise, human beings, they can say all kinds of arrogant things. They can say we perfected our worship. We worshipped Allah so much, great worship we deserve. This is all arrogance from the human being.
Right.
So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is As-Salam, and from Him is As-Salam. Tabarakta ya dhal jalali wal ikram. Tabarakta meaning also the meaning of that He is the one that is perfect in His names and attributes. He has the perfect barakah and the perfect names of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. It's really, the more the person reflect, there's nothing on the face of earth where human beings can praise Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in such a perfect way, unless you would find it in the deen of Islam, in the Quran and in the Sunnah of the Prophet ﷺ, because it's wahy revelation. Look at what people say all over the world about Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. You would find saying things deficient and things that are so bad, as if Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is like a human being. And when they praise Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, it's all weak statements that has no really perfect meaning to it.
Right.
But in the Quran and the Sunnah of the Prophet ﷺ, nothing more perfect than this.
When you look at these names, Sheikh, like you made mention, and look at the prayer, you can't help but admit that Islam is the monotheistic religion. It is the religion of pure tawheed. You're constantly praising Allah.
Right. And that's one of the things that Muslims need to use in their da'wah. Those individuals, those human beings that really they are sincere, they claim to love Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and they want to worship their Creator. Where is that on the face of earth where people can really worship Him and praise Him? There's no such a thing unless they would follow the deen of Islam. They would see how Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is to be praised in this life in the most perfect way, where the hearts are not attached to any of the creation of Allah. And that's why really there is no monotheistic religion in that essence except in the deen of Islam. Otherwise everybody is committing shirk and associating partners with Allah.
Okay, excellent. Sheikh, another narration we have where Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala tells us that As-Salaam is from amongst His names. فَأَفْشُوهُ بَيْنَكُمْ. So spread it amongst yourselves. Why is Allah ordering us to spread His name?
This is the essence of the worship of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, but specifically this word As-Salaam and Salam that we keep on hearing all day long. We hear it, we say it in our salah, we say it when we greet one another, and the Prophet ﷺ ordered us to spread it. And one of the signs of the hour actually, which is a negative one, is when people would give salam only to the ones that they know. We are ordered as Muslims to spread the salam to the ones that we know and the ones that we do not know. So spreading this among the people is basically stating that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is the one that is free from all weaknesses, and therefore we should worship Him alone. And you give the comfort, you're already declaring and giving that comfort to the one in front of you, that you are protected from any harm that would come from me. I would never harm you, because it doesn't make sense that you would say As-Salamu alaykum, may Allah protect you from all harm, and then you would harm that person. It doesn't make sense. And that's why when it comes from the heart, then the most or the safest individual that people should deal with is the Muslim. Opposite to what people spread. Really, and this is for truth, if people worship Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, follow the deen of Islam, the most trustworthy, the most, the one that you would feel the most safe when you're with and in his company is a true Muslim.
SubhanAllah. And Sheikh, if in the mornings, when you turn to your neighbor in the West and you say good morning, they become very happy that you've greeted them with such a greeting. But imagine if you were to say to them every morning, instead of saying good morning, you say to them, may peace and tranquility be upon you. I mean, that's so much more stronger.
Right, more stronger, and it's an everlasting one. Not just good morning in the morning only, it's in the morning, in the evening, and next day, till you die, till the day of judgment. You're making dua, supplication to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala that person is safe and tranquil and in the best state forever.
And Sheikh, just on that note as well, like you mentioned, how important is it that we do spread the salam, not just amongst friends, but amongst everyone that we see? Because we tend to find nowadays that people don't say salam, even to your neighbor. Very rarely you will even greet them or speak to them. So how important is it that we meet elders, youngsters, people we know with salam?
The importance of it is that the Prophet ﷺ, he ordered us, and that's from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And he said that this is one of the ways that people will enter Jannah, because Jannah is Darus Salam, is the place of salam, the place of peace and tranquility and perfection. And therefore for people to enter Jannah, the Prophet ﷺ said, one of which is Afshu Salam, that لن تدخل الجنة حتى تؤمنوا. You would never enter Jannah till you are a believer. ولن تؤمنوا حتى تحبوا. And you would never believe till you love one another.
Okay.
And then the Prophet ﷺ mentioned what is the means for people to love each other so that they would believe, so that they would enter Jannah.
Sure.
He said, أَلَا أَدُلُّكُمْ عَلَى شَيْءٍ إِذَا فَعَلْتُمُوهُ تَحَبَّبْتُمْ. Should I inform you of something that if you do, you would love each other, and therefore you would have Iman completed, and then you would enter Jannah? He said, أَفْشُوا السَّلَامَ بَيْنَكُمْ. أَفْشُوا, it's a powerful word, means spread the salam. That you would never find someone without a salam. Something that is spread among the people. That you make salam the ones that you know and the ones that you do not know. Muslims, they need to do this, and they need to mean it, and they need to have that sincere dua to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, so that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will perfect their iman, and the great brotherhood in the deen of Islam starts with this.
Okay, excellent. Sheikh, inside your response there, you mentioned that Darus Salam is considered to be paradise. Is that because Jannah has no deficiencies, like you made mention that Allah Salam had no deficiencies? Is that replicated in Jannah?
Definitely. And who's the one that is calling people to Dar As-Salaam? Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Wallahu yad'u ila Dar As-Salaam. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala calls to the Dar. Dar is the dwelling or the place of As-Salaam. When people have no weakness and no fatigues and no whatever people would think of something, the slightest thing that make them uncomfortable. It doesn't have to be something physical, something even with their thoughts, with their concerns. And when we think of this life, if a person would just think for a few minutes, there's the future that we have no idea what is it. Causes all kinds of concerns and worries and things like this. The past with all its miseries and sadness and things like this. Many things that makes or bring discomfort and miseries in the life of the human being, and the physical things and so on and so forth. When people enter Jannah, all of that goes away. The past, even in this life, becomes a moment of joy when people remember it, because they would see the bounties of Allah on them. And the future, it's an everlasting happiness. Every day is better than the day before. Whatever they wish for, they get. And they get to see Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So that's why this life, the heart should be attached to this. That's why it's Dar As-Salaam in the most perfect way, where people would achieve or gain as a result of being in that state of As-Salaam in this life, when they worshipped Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala the way He ordered them subhanahu wa ta'ala.
Okay, Sheikh, on that note, let's take a short break, and then when we come back, we'll continue our discussion on the name As-Salaam. Dear brothers and sisters, we're going to take a short break here. We started our discussion talking about the beautiful name of Allah, As-Salaam, and like the Sheikh mentioned, it's freeing from the perfect form of perfection, if we can say such a thing. And the Sheikh also made mention of the importance of spreading salam. I think that's the lesson we can take out of what we've taken so far. Let's take a break, and then when we come back, we'll continue with our discussion, and hopefully we'll get some phone calls from around the world sharing their thoughts or their responses to our question. So we'll see you all in a few moments. As-Salamu alaykum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Welcome back, dear viewers, joining us live on our program, Gems of the Heart, where we are talking about the important names and attributes of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And we began by talking about As-Salaam today. Let's continue with our discussion here. Sheikh, let's move forward looking at the name As-Salaam. We also find inside of the Quran in Surah Furqan, where Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala talks about the attributes of Ibadur Rahman. And inside that, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, وَإِذَا خَاطَبُهُمُ الْجَاهِلُونَ قَالُوا سَلَامًا. What is the meaning of that verse?
The Ibadur Rahman, the slaves of the most beneficent Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, the special ones among them, because everybody is a slave of Allah. But the slaves of Allah, those who are obedient to Allah, those who have the good attributes of human beings, one of which is that when the ignorant ones, they speak to them, so that means they speak to them with ignorance. Then they would respond with salama. Salama is nakira here mentioned, which means any beautiful word that would bring all kinds of good and peace and tranquility. So they would respond totally opposite to what ignorant speech is. So you can imagine someone is talking ignorantly to someone else, but this believer, he would respond by only words that would bring as-salam. Something that is away from all harm or evil, that would bring tranquility to the person. And this is something that is amazing, how the believers, because of Al-Islam, because of their submission within their own selves to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, they don't really pay attention too much of what people do as far as retaliation and all of these silly things. They seek rewards from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. They see that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is testing them with those who are ignorant, with those who are good, whatever. So they would seek rewards from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, since they are in submission to Allah, from anything in this life. One of which even the ignorant things that come up with from individuals, from other individuals. Why? Because they're constantly in remembrance of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, that brings so much peace. People see that in their life. Those who have peace in their life, they would relate to this so much. They're not into what human beings, those who are ignorant, are dealing with. People are silly when being having disputes over silly things, or things that it's not going to be forever. And that's why the believers, they seek for what's higher, the everlasting joy in the hereafter, to enter the Jannah of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And therefore they would speak in a nice way. They would not respond with injustice for someone that treated them with injustice, because injustice is forbidden. This is all religion. It's not just for a reward that comes from a human being. Seek a reward from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala alone.
Okay, excellent. Sheikh, on that matter, what would be the opposite then of As-Salam?
The opposite of As-Salam is basically, I'm not sure exactly if there's anything that causes to be weak or deficient or full of evil. like say for example evenness, something that is evil, that's the opposite of As-Salaam. Anything that is whatever, since Salam is a very general word, as is even mentioned in the verse, قالوا سلاما, they say what is good and what is comfortable, it's easy. Anything is the opposite of that. Comes from the simple word that a person can say that causes discomfort, to the action, physical actions that transgressing, right? Shedding blood, slandering with one's word, even sometimes with one's gesture on his face. And the opposite of that is when a person smiles to someone. So anything that is opposite to what is perfect, that's the opposite of As-Salaam with levels.
Okay, excellent. Sheikh, also we find in another verse in Surah Yunus where Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, وَاللَّهُ يَدْعُ إِلَى دَارِ السَّلَامِ. That is it true for us to understand that Allah wants us to go to paradise? He wants us to go to Dar es-Salaam, but it is us who refuse. Is that right?
That's correct, and that's what ad-da'wah means. When you call someone to something, that means you want them to come. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is the one that is the owner of all things. He would not call people to Dar es-Salaam, which is Jannah, when He doesn't really want them to be in, or because of greed or anything like that. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is the owner of all things. If all humanity they enter Jannah, it would not take away from the treasures of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. But Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala made it in such a way that only the believers, those who would enter Jannah. That's why He called them by sending the messengers of Allah and revealing the books and giving them time on the face of earth to reflect and to accept and to submit themselves to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And the mercy of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala comes before the anger of Allah. But whoever refuses, as the Prophet ﷺ said in the hadith, كُلُّ أُمَّتِ يَدْخُلْ الْجَنَّةِ إِلَّا مَنْ أَبَى. All of my ummah, all of my nation will enter Jannah except those who refuse. So they said, O Prophet of Allah, who would refuse to enter Jannah? He said, مَنْ أَطَاعَنِي دَخَلَ الْجَنَّةِ وَمَنْ عَصَانِي فَقَدْ أَبَى. Whoever obeys me, then he entered Jannah. Whoever disobey me, he had refused. So when people choose to refuse to accept the invitation from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, then they should not blame anyone but their own selves.
Okay, excellent. Sheikh, also looking at the definition of Allah, like we said, the Salam meaning perfection. And if we look across to other theologies or other religions, take Christianity for example, and we use this standard to look at Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, where the Christians will claim that Allah's perfection is only manifested by the killing of His Son. So would we say that that's a contradiction in perfection, that He is in need of killing the most beloved thing to Him?
Of course, this is all full of contradictions, and that's why, because when something is man-invented with matters of belief, you would find all kinds of contradictions. How can the Lord be the most merciful, and He would kill His own Son to forgive the sins of the human beings? It doesn't make sense. It's invented. Right? And a person would say Allah is able to do all things, yes, but because the matter is invented, and it challenges the basic fitrah and innate of what human beings they understand. The religion sometimes comes with things that is over the capacity of the human beings to understand, but it would never comes with something that contradicts the basics of every single human beings on the entire earth. So when they say this is something from the divine we don't understand, no, it's not that we don't understand. It's not over our capacity. It's contradicting the basics of our own nature as human beings when Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala put the intellect in ourselves. So when we don't know exactly the essence, for example, of some of the names and attributes of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, because it's over our capacity, but it doesn't contradict the basic innate in ourselves. So when they say killing and sacrificing for this is against the basic innate of the human beings. Mercy and killing for His own Son to forgive, He can forgive. He's the most forgiver.
And the killing was done in the most excruciating ways.
Right, and He's the most forgiver. So there's no need for such a thing, for the sins to be forgiven. Plus, again, of course, it's not a matter of intellect versus an opinion or so. It's a matter of this is something invented. There's no proof of whatsoever that this is something that Isa alayhi salam said also. And that's against the essence of being As-Salam.
Okay, right. Also, Sheikh, we find in Surah Al-Ma'idah that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala uses the word Subul As-Salam. What is the difference between that and previously we looked at Dar As-Salam?
Subul As-Salam is the paths of As-Salam. And this is the way of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala on earth. And this is how the believers that are called to follow the paths of As-Salam. And when we say subul means paths. And we know that the truth is only one path. But for matters of peace and with actions, There are many actions. They're all on the same path, which is the path of the truth. And they're all gathered with the same concept, with the same goal. And that is to worship Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala alone. And that's why As-Salaam, or peace, or to be away from all imperfections, it's in the heart and the speech and actions. So that's why many things would lead into the same path.
Okay, excellent. Dear viewers, a gentle reminder once again about our phone numbers. They are there across your screens. Do pick up your phones and do join us. Give us your answers to our question from last week, the difference between the name Ghuffar and Ghafoor. Let's hear your responses. If you'd like to add anything else to the program as well, feel free to do so. Pick up the phone and give us your contributions. Sheikh, moving forward now, looking at, you said Subul are the different ways leading all to peace. I want to talk about some of these possible ways. And the first one you mentioned earlier was the fitrah itself. How is the fitrah one of peace and to lead you to peace?
The fitrah that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala created the human beings with is that they are in need of their creation, of their creator.
Okay.
They are in need of this. And that's why whenever they are in time of great necessity, they turn to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala alone. So this is in the fitrah. So that's why the innate of the human beings, for them to lose that peace when they start to associate partners with Allah, when they would worship other than Allah, when they rely on other than Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So bringing back human beings to their pure innate is to believe that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is the Lord of the Alameen, and He's the one that is free from all deficiencies, therefore He's the only one to be worshipped.
Okay.
Subhanahu wa ta'ala. And that would, usually the opposite of peace comes when there's contradictions. And that's where people, they find themselves so much disturbed when there are things in the opposite of it. They want to be happy, but they want to, happiness without struggle, for example. Or they want two opposite things, and they can't really, see how can that be done.
Okay.
And that's why contradictions, as Sheikh Taymiyyah rahimahullah, he said, that's the first level of corruption.
Okay.
Which leads to anything opposite to it. As-Salaam. Islam frees the person from any contradictions. There's no contradictions whatsoever in matters of religion. In matters of belief in our life should not be any contradictions in it. And this is how to reach that level of peace.
Okay.
If you believe that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is the only one worthy of worship, don't contradict yourself. Be in peace with this. Be in peace with your own self. That means obey Him alone. Don't try to obey Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and to obey the opposite order of your boss, for example, or even your parents or your children. Allah wants you to pray at certain times, and human beings, they don't want you to. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala wants you to wear hijab if you're a woman, and human beings, they don't want you to. To contradict yourself, to try to please both, so you would really wear something that looks like as if it's hijab, but really it's not, because you want to please human beings, you're not going to have that peace. And that's why the peace and the perfect peace is not just for anybody that says La ilaha illallah Muhammadur Rasulullah. They have to fully apply this in their life.
Okay.
And that's why for our Muslim sisters, for the Muslim men, everybody, the obedience when it's only to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, this is the ultimate peace that a person would have in this life and hereafter.
Okay, excellent. Sheikh, also the acts of worship. Allah gives us 5 daily prayers, gives a month of fasting, gives us Hajj if we're able to do so. How are these different acts of worship leading us to peace and also leading us to Darul Salam?
There's a hadith of the Prophet ﷺ that says something that we are in this life. He said, تَحْتَرِقُونَ تَحْتَرِقُونَ فَإِذَا صَلَّيْتُمُ الْفَجْرَ that means you're burning yourself. You're burning yourself. Till when you pray Salatul Dhuhr, then you wash this away.
Okay.
Then you burn yourself. Then you burn yourself. And then when you pray Asr, that goes away. So life is like burning oneself.
Right.
The miseries and the stresses of this life is such an evil thing. And that's why people either would go to intoxications or to be busy with the desires of this life so much that they don't want to be awakened from it. They want to be constantly enjoying something so that they don't think.
Okay.
Otherwise, if they think, they'll be miserable. Because life has all kinds of stresses and things like this. Except for the believers. When the believers would see that this life is for a reason. They have a mission in this life. So the difficult things in this life, they face it with, they have a wisdom, there's a wisdom behind it, they have a mission. They have been sent on the face of earth to worship Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala with all of these difficulties.
Okay.
So everything would fall in place. So the salah comes, takes the person away from all of the stress by turning to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala alone, emptying the heart from all kinds of attachment, but to praise Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, refueling, basically, if it's correct to say that, our emotions and our souls with the words of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to be able to continue to the next prayer.
Okay.
And then we wash ourselves. We cure ourselves from the burning that happens so that we can continue from one prayer to the other. And it's really, how can a person live this life in peace and tranquility when it's from one prayer to the other, he's not connecting himself with the worship of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. As if Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala created us as human beings in such a way, we can never live in peace unless 5 times a day we have to gain this great effect of the salah in our life. And if not, then a person is living a life of misery. Take the time out to be in peace with yourself when you worship Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, the creator of the heavens and the earth.
And that's why I think, Sheikh, one of the most peaceful moments in the day is when you finally prayed your Isha prayer and you know that you've completed all 5 prayers and you feel a little bit of tranquility that you've done your obligations.
Right, and waking up for Fajr. Actually, there's a level of security and peace. Only the people that would pray Fajr would feel it. Especially when they go to the masjid for the men. This is something that you cannot really explain it with words. Because Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is As-Salaam. And He's the one that calls His slaves to wake up early in the morning, to go worship Him. And that's why the Prophet ﷺ, when he said, مَنْ صَلَّى الْفَجْرَ فِي جَمَاعَةٍ فَهُوَ فِي ذِمَّةِ اللَّهِ. Whoever prays Fajr in Jama'ah, he's under the protection of Allah. There's no more peace than this.
SubhanAllah.
A person, when he's under the protection of Allah, warning those who might harm the one that prayed in Fajr, because he's under the protection of Allah. If someone is to be said, he's under the protection of the king, people will stay away.
Sure.
And also for the individual himself, that Allah chose him to be among His obedient slave. That means he should not break this honor and dignity. So that's the best level of peace and security that a person would feel, that he is obedient to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala.
Okay, excellent. Sheikh, also a very common accusation made against Islam is when we look at the rules that Islam puts in place, for example, like the hudud or the qisas, the rulings there. People will say that these are not peaceful rulings. How would we respond to these people?
People, they say many things. And human beings, they would not cease to say things. And they say things based on what they know or what they see. And when human beings, they govern their lives based on their weaknesses and deficiencies, so they would always say weaknesses and deficiencies. These rulings are from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala because He knows best and we do not know when it comes to the rulings from Allah. And if people claim, again this is the contradiction, they want to have peace in their societies, but they don't want to have or apply the hudud of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Human beings are going to continue to have evil in them.
Okay.
They're going to be evil people in any society. So those people that want to live in some ideal world, they say we want to have peace, no punishment, no hudud to be applied. So when these evil people, they start killing and they start stealing and so on and so forth, this is called peace, or this is spreading fear in a society. It cannot be peace. So how can you stop this? By saying to the people, oh please be peaceful. We want to have peace. It doesn't work this way. And that's why the difference between Islam and other ways of life, or even religions that people invented, people think religion is just to say some soft things. Some people, they listen to this, and many people, they don't listen. Some people, the only thing that they listen to is if there is a fear or there has a law that is very strict. And these are the counted ones that can cause so much disturbance in any society. Counted ones can cause so much fear to people and lose their security because of individuals. So whenever the punishment from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala comes and it's very severe, it's not to spread fear, it's the opposite. It brings security to the communities, it brings peace among the people, and this is something that is practically seen and clear. You would find in the most sophisticated countries in the world today, what's the population of the people in prison? And how many homicides that are being committed? It's mind-boggling really. When you look on the other side, when the ruling of capital punishment or the hudud is applied, it's applied to save life. As Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says in the Quran, وَلَكُمْ فِي الْقِصَاصِ حَيَاتٌ يَا أُولِي الْأَلْبَابِ. You have in qisas or capital punishment or retaliation punishment by the people of authority, you have life in this. It saves life, not that it wastes life. You would find that if it's applied in a society, no killing, no theft whatsoever. When people look at the time of the Prophet ﷺ, the companions radiallahu anhum, when the hudud was applied perfectly, that you would find counted incidents of killing and theft and so on, because people, they know that the punishment is a serious one, so the evil ones won't do it.
Okay.
And then the outcome of that is people would live in peace. The real peace will be in place. But again, human beings, they just say things and they don't know what they're saying, and they cause more harm and corruption to societies and humanity, when they just say nice words. And this is the sihr, basically, or the deception that people are living today in this world. The industry of spreading fear and spreading nice words without reality to it.
Sure, and also many places around the world, the United States being for one, have privatized their prison service, so they actually make money from people going into prison.
Right, and it's industry of deception, really, what the media is doing and things like this, spreading deception among people, spreading fear with no reality in it.
Sure.
And you find human beings sometimes they get deceived and say, yeah, wow, it sounds nice, but then the reality of their life is life of misery and fear and bloodshed and so on and so forth.
Sure, and also Sheikh, when we look at the rulings of Allah, like we've been mentioned, that they may appear to be very severe, but even to actually implement them is a very long process. It's not like you will just start implementing them without thinking or without a procedure. It's very difficult to actually implement them.
And that's where people they need to study, really, before they start speaking about things. Even cutting the hands of a thief. Who is the one for his hand to be cut off?
Okay.
If he steals? Is it any stealing? Definitely not. And the ulama, when they mention, this is by the hadith of the Prophet ﷺ, if something that is not locked in hirz, something that is not locked and protected, and somebody steals it, he is not to have his hands cut off.
Sure.
It's only if something that a person covers and securely put it in a place, and a person goes intentionally to break this and to take it from there, this is where the severe punishment comes. And that's why when it's applied again, you would find counted cases that ever comes in place. Why? Because people would stop stealing.
And we can clearly say that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is our creator, so He knows what will stop us from doing these sins, and man obviously doesn't, and hence the crime rate is going up, not down.
Right, and the same thing with homicides, with killing. It becomes the easiest thing for a person to shoot someone and to kill someone, and that person loses his life, which is the most precious thing for human beings in this life, and then the other person just go to prison. It doesn't matter. Some people, they were willing to revenge because of the evil in themselves and the anger. And so what if a person would say, I'm in prison for 25 years or whatever, at least I revenged against that person.
Okay.
And that brings the fear in any society.
Okay, and final question, Sheikh, before we look at the responses to our question, is it from amongst the principles of the Sharia that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala wants to preserve the deen, preserve human life, and bring about peace?
Yes, and if we look at what is the most important thing that people would see in the Day of Judgment, if the Day of Judgment is present now, people would want to come back to this world to do what? To live in peace? Or to be believers so that they would save themselves from the worst thing ever, which is the hellfire? Definitely to protect themselves from the hellfire. So because this is coming, and people would see it definitely, and the disbelievers would regret it so much, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala made the religion in such a way to protect them from the evil within their own selves.
Okay.
So that they would see the truth. And with all of this, still there's no coercion in matters of religion. You cannot force someone to be a Muslim. They will wish that this is the case in the Day of Judgment, as Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, رُبَمَا يَوَدُّ الَّذِينَ كَفَرُوا لَوْ كَانُوا مُسْلِمِينَ. The disbelievers will wish they were Muslims.
Okay.
Right? And this is coming. But then in this life, you would find the rulings to protect oneself from the evil within our own selves, so that people do not really have the real regret in the Day of Judgment. And also in the short term, the life of peace and to be away from bloodshed and so on and so forth, you would find the rulings of the Deen of Islam, the forbidden acts like drinking intoxications, which leads to all kinds of evil. When this is not present, and you can see the communities or the societies, Muslim societies, when there's no drinking and wines and so on, when you see other societies where people, they drink loosely, what happened? Completely different societies. You can walk in the streets of Muslim communities in the middle of the night without fear for your own life, and other places you can't do that because of drugs and intoxications that would make a person like an animal. He wants to kill to get a shot or to get a drink or something of that nature. And when that is spread among the Muslim countries too, and because of the weakness of Al-Iman, and without applying the rules of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, yes, then the matter becomes also less secure.
Okay.
Because of breaking the orders of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala.
Okay, excellent. On that note, Sheikh, we can turn to our questions from last week and read some of the quotations we have here. Dear brothers and sisters, let's turn to our Facebook now and look at the answers you put forward to the question which was there last week about the difference between the name Al-Ghaffar and Al-Ghafoor. And we'll get Sheikh's response to see who got it right and who got it wrong. Sheikh, our first response comes from Sister Mary Oli, and she responds and she says that As-Salamu Alaikum. And you can see the answers there as well on the screens. There we go, the very first one, Sister Mary Oli, she says As-Salamu Alaikum. Ghaffar, or Ghafur, sorry, it means that Allah is forgiving continually as long as the person seeks forgiveness. And Ghaffar means Allah forgives even the major sins if the person turns to Him in repentance.
MashaAllah. Perfect. Good.
Perfect.
MashaAllah.
MashaAllah.
Yes.
Talking about As-Salam, and the answers are also perfect as well.
Right, MashaAllah. It's like the difference between so many forgivenesses versus the major sins that get forgiven to, which is, MashaAllah, she put it very good.
Excellent. Well done, Sister Mary Oli. And then we have Brother Latif, and he says, As-Salamu Alaikum. Al-Ghaffar is the one who covers and forgives the major sins such that the slave isn't punished for it, while Al-Ghafur is the one who continually forgives without any limits.
MashaAllah.
Perfect.
MashaAllah. Perfect. MashaAllah.
MashaAllah. All right, well done, Brother Latif as well. Sister Zaza Muhammad, she says, As-Salamu Alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Al-Ghafur is the ever forgiving over and over again. Al-Ghaffar is the all forgiving. Allah forgives even the major sins if one repents before their death.
MashaAllah.
10 out of 10 again?
Inshallah, yes, MashaAllah.
MashaAllah. Well done to all three. Sister Mary Oli, congratulations, MashaAllah. You got the question, as the Sheikh said, perfect. Brother Latif as well, perfect. And Sister Zaza Muhammad, well done to all three of you, MashaAllah. May Allah bless you. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala increase you in your knowledge. Sheikh, we have the question for the next week, or this week till the next week. Would you like to go ahead with the question?
No, you go ahead, inshallah.
Okay, so let us present the question for this week, and we will put this up, inshallah, after the program on Facebook, and you can continue with your responses there. The question, inshallah, for this week is going to be with regards to the name As-Salaam. In what verse is the name As-Salaam mentioned? We mentioned it right at the beginning of the program. If you go back to the beginning, in the rerun, you'll find the Sheikh mentioned it there, that the name As-Salaam is mentioned in one particular verse inside the Holy Quran. Please respond to that. The question will be on Facebook. Give us your comments, and like we did today, we'll read out your comments inside the program next week. Sheikh, we've come to the end of our program here, but before we conclude, I would like to just hear a few words from you that today, unfortunately, when we look around the world, we find Muslims in a lot of difficulties, a lot of suffering, quite the opposite to As-Salaam, and we're here talking about As-Salaam. What can we do practically, just very briefly, that inshallah we can try to help or solve or contribute to bringing Salam around the world?
For Muslims, we should have the way very clearly in our life how to attain this Salam, and that is within our own selves. We need to really, as Muslims, to repent to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and to turn to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala alone for seeking help, and to really give up on seeking help from any other than Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. This is how the person would reach this matter of peace and tranquility, even if the situation is a difficult one. And for a Muslim to die as a martyr, to die for the sake of Allah, the moment of death becomes the moment of relief. So always with patience and seeking rewards from Allah and following the orders of Allah, never compromise the religion. And that's why when we talk about As-Salam and the effect of that in our hearts, because this is the essence of the program, when we really submit ourselves to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, the one that is free from all deficiencies, this is where the heart would feel the tranquility and the peace and the goodness that makes the acts of worship make sense and beautiful. And life becomes, a person would perceive it in a totally different way. He would always be happy, even if he faces evil things, because he knows that this is a test from Allah, the As-Salam, so that we can deal with it the way that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala wants from us, and that always brings the peace and tranquility in the hearts of the believers.
Okay, thank you very much, Sheikh. On that note, we will have to conclude. I'd like to thank you once again for coming to the program and sharing with us your knowledge. And I'd like to conclude by saying As-Salamu Alaikum. Thank you very much. Dear viewers, we've come to the end of our program here today on Gems of the Heart. What a beautiful program. How time flies so quickly when you're enjoying yourself, as they say. The name As-Salam, the topic of peace, one which we desperately need to understand, desperately need to implement in our lives as well. Don't forget that there is a narration of the Prophet ﷺ which talks about the one who memorizes the 100 names of Allah, that person will enter into paradise. Now the memorization, as the Shaykh explained, is not just the name itself, but the meanings and the implementation in our daily lives. So we've talked about As-Salam today. We looked at so many different aspects relating to As-Salam, and inshallah ta'ala, I'd also like to remind all the viewers with the topic of what is going on around the world, that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has told us that one of the first questions that we will be asked in front of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala Yawm al-Qiyamah is about the spilling of blood. It is not from the actions of the Muslims to spill blood, and not just that, but to sit back while Muslim blood is being spilled. It's the job of a Muslim to spread peace, and to spread peace around the world, be it among Muslims, be it among non-Muslims. We are ambassadors of peace. Let us turn back to these qualities. Let us be ambassadors of the Quran and of the Sunnah, and let's spread peace around the world. Dear brothers and sisters, I'd like to thank you all for tuning in, and inshallah ta'ala we will see you next week on our program Gems of the Heart. So until next week, As-Salamu alaykum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.